Welcome back. You're now watching the lifestyle segment on the weekend show brought to you by Holy Crunch Popcorn. On the 28th of March 2022, at about 9 to 11 p.m., Nigerians on social media found out that there's been an attack on the Abuja-Kaduna train line. Now, days later, it was confirmed that at least 9 people were killed with over 20 injured. Unfortunately, over 100 people were reported to be abducted or missing. Incidentally, some video footage was released by the kidnappers, terrorists, or abductors. And just in the last week, another video of about 60 people were released where you could see them grouped in about groups of 4s. However, it's been over 1 month with Nigerians in captivity. A group has reported that at least 3,500 people have been killed and some kidnapped just within the first quarter of 2022, and that's another report. However, what happens to the families, what happens to the people who are in abduction, and what happens to the lives of the defense and security officers who have lost their lives in trying to fight for Nigerians? Is this where we leave it, or what do we do about it? And having this conversation with me, I have a conflict communication specialist, a writer, a journalist. I mean, Al-Kasim, I've known you for over 10 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Al-Kasim Abdulkadir, welcome to the weekend show.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
So this is a conversation we started offline and then had Twitter Spaces, and now we're having this on Continental TV. Why is it important that we have this conversation, Al-Kasim?
Andy, I'd like to start by saying that it's a national tragedy. You know, when you have a service of government attacked by non-state actors, when you have a service of government not only attacked by non-state actors, but also have Nigerian citizens killed, injured, and abducted, then it's nothing short of a national tragedy. You know, this is a tragedy that not only affects Nigeria, but affects the image of Nigeria internationally. You know, it's all about Nigeria being a transition country. Is it safe enough for investment? Is it safe enough for citizens? Is it safe enough for the growth and development of Nigeria itself as a country in the Committee of Nations? So it's a tragedy that affects every one of us. Every one of us. If you are a Nigerian citizen, if you're an African, if you are a human being, this is a tragedy that should affect you. Because when you hold a group of people against their will, away from their families, then it's nothing short of a tragedy.
As much as we try not to be political on the lifestyle segment, I found it baffling to see the Minister for Transformation, Honorable Rotimi Amechi, declaring interest to run for presidency when this government has prided itself on infrastructure, and the rail line is one of the huge successes of this government running for it. What's your take on the government's silence on this matter? Do you think it's part of its strategy, or have these people been forgotten?
I don't think they've been forgotten, to be honest. However, there's a strategy where government thinks that citizens don't have to know the everyday business of security engagement. So, for example, yesterday evening, there was a national security meeting led by President Muhammadu Buhari with the ministers, with governors of the relevant states suffering from insecurity, with the service chiefs, and in the entire security apparatus, you know. However, when the news of this meeting was reported, the nitty-gritty, the details were left out of it. But your guess is as good as mine. This is the government coming together with the relevant people, them talking about it, them looking for the right strategies, right solutions on what to do. However, the nitty-gritty, the strategies is not in the public domain, because Perhaps it's not my business or it's not your business what the government intends to do in terms of curbing security, in terms of mitigating further attacks, but it's the business of those who are saddled with the mandate and responsibility to ensure that security remains at the topmost burner of government activities. But indeed, there have been a series of meetings by those who matter and those who have the mandate. However, the main information is not in the public domain for you and I, because perhaps we're not, it's not our business, maybe.
So I think it's quite reassuring that these meetings are going on and some work is being done. But a major problem Nigerians have complained about with this administration is communicating to the people. You don't have to give them the full information, but this should be as loud as the people who are trying to run for presidency. In your experience, you've led communications for the Presidential Committee on Northeast Initiative, and when we have these conversations, we talk about their three parts to this. One, the people who are suffering from this. Two, or who have been killed and abducted. Two, the families of the people out there. And then three, the communities. Now, some people were able to escape and some people are back to their families. But I've seen tweets, I've seen Instagram posts of the trauma which they have experienced and still experience. What do you feel is, what's the midway process for people who have experienced this? You don't have people witness people being murdered, experience a rail track being exploded, and then send them back to the society and expect everything to be normal. What do you think is the gap and which should be filled, especially with the people who have experienced this?
Okay, you've asked a double-barrel question. I'll start with the first one, which is communication. It's often said that when there's crisis, the first casualty is the truth. So when you don't give people information, they go around curating false information, misinformation and disinformation. So what you have is that because you've not told people what you're doing, because you've not told people what is happening, people are now left to imagine, to create their own information. So if you go online, you see a lot of information. This person has been released. Like last week, there was so much information that Sadiq Ango, one of the abducted passengers, was released. You know, it took his family to come out to refute that news that he was actually released. So when you don't give people information, that's what happens. I would have thought that a crisis communication center will have been set up, you know, to be able to give the families information. I would have thought that on the first day it happened, you know, a command center at Rigasa and Idu will have set up, because I also suggested it on Twitter the day that the incidents happened, so that people can come to this center and say, my family member was abducted. And then government can now begin an inventory, can now begin to tick on the manifest that this person is injured, this person was abducted, this person is home with his family. So that we are now able to have a 360 degree of information, so that almost on a daily basis, families have news of what government is doing. This news doesn't have to be in the public domain, but families are owed that responsibility of duty, that duty of care, for them to know what government is actually doing to release their families from captivity. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that. We hope that in the coming days that we see more of that, that government is actually able to set up a high-powered committee to engage families. Government is able to set up a crisis communication center to engage families on what is actually going on, so that it can serve as a form of therapy to the families. You know, Nigerians are extremely resilient people. We have seen examples of people who have been abducted for several years, coming back to society, living their lives. It shows the resilience of the Nigerian spirit. However, we're all human beings. You cannot count away trauma. You cannot count away nightmares. You cannot count away violent flashbacks to these episodes. I think the psychologists in our midst, in the society, should do more in setting up pro bono centers, for victims of trauma to be able to come forward and receive some form of counseling. Psychotherapy has been the weak link in our managing of terrorism and violence extremism in Nigeria at the moment. We've done very well with rehabilitation, we've done very well with reconstruction, but I think when it comes to mental rehabilitation, we still need to do a lot more. We shouldn't take it for granted that the average Nigerian has a very, very resilient character. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about mental health. And because mental health is abstract, because we don't see it, we only see physical injuries, we tend to downplay mental health.
Which is true, and I like that this is a conversation you are constantly having, and maybe this also is as a result of the work you've done in the Northeast, because the triple R, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and the likes has been a huge topic. And so, from my background as a sociologist, I wonder, how are the people who are dealing with this, how are they faring? Because Easter passed with people's families in captivity. It's been Ramadan, and people are separated from their families, and so it's so hard. And our thoughts go to and our warm expressions to the families of members who have been abducted. But another conversation which no one really wants to have is the fact that the bandits, I think the terrorists have released 2 videos so far. In the first video, they clearly stated that the government knows what they want. Yeah. They claim they're not looking for a ransom, but we understand that the first person who was released, because of his age, it is rumored that ransom close to 100 million was paid. However, some of Sahara reporters had reported, and some other outlets, that the terrorists are demanding for a prisoner exchange. And in most cases, when we have such high-scale abductions, the terrorists request for some of their commanders and sponsors to be released in exchange of the partners. Now, of the prisoners, we can't even call them prisoners, they're abducted people. Now, in this current situation with over 100 people reportedly abducted, if this is the demand by the terrorists saying, we'll release these people if you release some of our commanders, I think that puts the government in a tight position. But as an expert in this field, what do you feel should be the short, mid, and long-term way of handling such requests?
It's a very dicey situation. On one hand, you have the lives of Nigerian citizens at stake. The paramount responsibility of government remains the protection of lives and property. On the other hand, you have the issue of national security, the security of a sovereign state, because Nigeria is a sovereign state with all components of politics and governance, and its leadership in the Committee of Nations. So it now depends on what the people given the mandate, to secure Nigeria. And it all starts from the table of the president, because he's the commander-in-chief, and then down to the security architecture of the country, And in my personal opinion, I think in this instance, national compassion should be at the center stage. It should be a negotiating point to see that these Nigerian citizens in captivity, everything is done to secure their release so that they can be released to their families, because their families have been in extreme hardship and agony for more than a month. So in my mind, there's already a precedence. Some years back, the Presidential Committee on Dialogue and Reconciliation actually released prisoners in exchange for, it was actually called presidential magnanimity, That was what it was described as during the presidency of President Goodluck Jonathan, where members of non-state actors were actually released, based on a series of negotiations with non-state actors. So there's a precedence. It's not the first time non-state actors are calling for release. Those who work under the security mandate of the country, sometimes find it very difficult to hit this line. But I am calling for national compassion so that these Nigerian citizens in captivity can be released to their families. I know it's a very difficult thing because on one hand you have national security, and on one hand I'm also asking for national compassion. But the government is between a rock and a hard place. You can't storm the bush because there will be a high number of collateral damage. If my family member is in captivity, I wouldn't want the military to storm the bush because there will be a high level of collateral damage. And everyone knows this. Everyone knows this. So what we are asking for is for a negotiated end to this issue of the AK-9 passengers being in captivity. This is what we're asking for. And I think this is what should be done in the name of national compassion.
It's a tough one, and like you've said, the government is in a tight position. However, the political will, and it's time for the government to show itself. But talking national security, the Railway Corporation released, stated yesterday that the rail tracks have been repaired and they are ready to commence transportation between Abuja and Kaduna. For security purposes, they've said that each train would be accompanied by a military jet to ensure their security. Two questions. Is the timing right to start transportation, considering that this was the safest option? And two, do you feel the security precautions are enough for Nigerians to trust the system to use it once again?
It's very important that a sovereign state never ever shows defeat in the face of terrorism. It's very important that the Nigerian government, responds in a very positive light so that it increases the confidence of the populace in its services. And the NRC is not out of this context. But it's very, very important that in resuming services, that maximum security control is deployed. And for a military jet to escort the train is one of the measures that government thinks will give the optimum security deployment. However, at what cost? Let's remember that the train service is a public service. It's actually a subsidized service because it's mass transportation. And in every country of the world, mass transportation is a subsidized service. If you check the NRC circular, it actually didn't give a timeline to when it will resume. It said soon. Soon is a very ambiguous word because it can be next week, it can also be in the next 2 months. However, I know that they will not resume without having the maximum security deployment to cover the length of Abuja, of Idu, and Rigasa mileage lane of track of the train. So let's not preempt the government, let's not preempt the NRC. Let us stay and watch the gambit of security apparatus that it tends to deploy in order to increase consumer confidence, to increase the populace, the confidence of the populace in the particular service. But because a lot of people won't use the train if they don't see that there's maximum security deployment. It increases confidence if a fighter jet escorts it, because a fighter jet has the capacity to see miles beyond what the ordinary eyes cannot see because of its aerial superiority. So it's an advantage. and let's see the other components of the security deployment that the government intends to release.
On a final note, you spoke earlier about people are being left to source for information from wherever they get it, which in most cases is social media and anybody with above 1,000 followers. How do you advise media houses and journalists on reporting in crisis and conflict situations? What's your takeaway for them?
My take is when in doubt, leave it. Do not conjecture, do not misinform, do not disinform. And as a journalist, always attribute. If you want a statement, call the Minister of Transportation, call the NRC, call the government's spokesperson. Do not sit down and conjecture. Do not misinform, do not disinform. People are already suffering from trauma. You know, the government already has a lot on its hands that it's managing. So please do not aggravate the polity. Be responsible and responsive in your reportage.
Al-Kassim Abdul-Kadri, thank you so much for coming on The Weekend and sharing your views. We will be following this story closely, and we hope to bring you back to continue this conversation in the near future. And we do pray and hope for the safe return and release of those who have been abducted. So there you have it. That's all we can take on the lifestyle segment of The Weekend Show. Up next, we have Chef T with food. We also have Ayo with sports. Don't go away. My name is Andy Mataki.